Hi everyone, this is John Daly. I'm here again with Bernie Goldberg for another episode of the No BS Zone. How's it going today, Bernie?
So far, so good, John.
Good, good. So today's show is going to be a little different than most. A few months ago, we did an episode on some fascinating stories from Bernie's decades of journalism. It got some great reception from our members. So today we're going to talk about Bernie, some of your most notable interviews over the years, ones that you conducted for CBS News and also HBO. But before we get to that, we wanted to first touch on a big story that's currently in the news, one you happened to write about on Monday. I'm talking about the beating and death of Tyree Nichols at the hands of five police officers in Memphis, Tennessee. Nichols was black, so are the five policemen involved. But some people in the media have had a somewhat unique take on the story, and you wanted to talk about that some.
Yeah, if those five policemen who beat that black man to death, if those five policemen had been white, we know what would have happened. Besides all hell breaking loose, we would have heard cries of racism, and they may have been accurate. They may have been accurate. If five white policemen pummeled a black man who died 3 days later, calling it racist may have been accurate. But we didn't expect, I didn't anyway, expect to hear the word racism brought into the conversation when it was five black cops who beat a black man to death. Yet we are hearing it. I quote three intelligent, thoughtful black men in the column. Let me just read you a sentence from each. Institutional racism explains how five black men could engage in police brutality, leading to the death of a black man. So it's institutional racism that was at work, according to that scholar. Black cops are up, second one, black cops are often socialized in police departments that view certain neighborhoods as war zones. And the war zone, of course, means a black neighborhood. The third black scholar, this one is a professor, says white supremacy of policing explains what happened. These are not crazy, dopey theories. Uh, Black people and white people have different histories and often do see things through different lenses, view the same episode through a different lens. I understand that. But I have another theory, and it's really quite simple, that sometimes bad cops are simply bad cops. Sometimes racism is not involved. I don't know if those five black cops would have beat a white young man to death. Maybe they would have, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know if the white cop in Minneapolis would have beaten George Floyd to death if if George Floyd were white. I don't know if that white cop in Minneapolis is racist. He might have been. All I know for sure, John, is that he was a bad cop. And that's the essence of my argument. Sometimes bad cops are bad cops, and race shouldn't be brought into the discussion. These were thoughtful people who brought it in. I understand that. I just think that bringing race in, if you see, let's put it this way, let me end with this. If you see everything in America as racist, if you think America is fundamentally racist, if you think we have systemic racism throughout our DNA of our culture, then you're going to see five black cops beating a black man to death as racist. It's a logical conclusion. I just don't buy it.
No, these are good points. I think a lot of people are conditioned when they first hear a story like this, where a black individual was beaten or died at the hands of police officers. They immediately jump to this notion that there was a racist element involved. Much tougher to do it in this situation, but some are presuming that anyway. But yeah, interesting for sure.
I, I
Um,
hope I hope people will read the column or have read the column if they haven't already read it and see that I'm not doing a knee-jerk response. I'm not saying, oh, they're crazy. There's no racism involved. Black people and white people, as I say, have different histories. We see things differently in many cases. I'm just saying, I believe, and I'm basing this on things that I've seen over the years as a reporter and as an observer, that sometimes it's simply a bad cop doing bad things. May be racist in some cases, but it may not be.
Right. So everyone should check out that column. It's on bernardgoldberg.com. It went up Monday, and yeah, I encourage everybody to check it out. It is a very thoughtful piece for Bernie there. So let's move on to the interviews. One of your interviews that I see posted and talked about online still to this day, from time to time, because of how remarkable it was the one you did for Real Sports with boxer Mike Tyson. I believe it was in 2013. Can you describe that interview along with why it turned out to be so memorable for so many people?
The story was about Mike Tyson taking his one-man show to Broadway. That was the reason for the story, and we got into the fact that he owed the IRS a lot of money. Uh, at one point in his house in Las Vegas, he went to a book show and he showed me a book and he said, I'm just reading this book. It's by Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche. And I said, what? I haven't read any books by Friedrich Nietzsche. He said, yeah, no, I was reading Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher. Mike Tyson is a lot smarter than a lot of people think he is. Let's start with that. But the memorable moment for me, John, was when he started talking about the death of his young daughter in an accident on a treadmill. She was on a treadmill when somebody else was on the treadmill, and she got caught up in a rope, and it was a terrible thing, and she died. And he got very emotional. He didn't think it was an accident, actually, but he got very emotional. And this was one of the scariest moments in my long career in journalism. You could laugh all you want, John. You wouldn't laugh if it happened to you. He leaned in very close to me and he said, you're going to have to leave now.
I couldn't handle it. Oh. You have to go. Now, you understand, right? Thank you. Thank you, man. You want to take this stuff off?
So, Mike Tyson, the man who famously said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, leaned in and very calmly said, you're going to have to leave now. And then he turned around and walked upstairs and started crying like a baby. And he was embarrassed by that. And I said, Mike, you don't have to be embarrassed. There's nothing wrong with crying over the death of your child. And I will add this, which is gratuitous. The producer said to me after he was out of sight and upstairs behind closed door, he said, are we going to leave? And I said, no, we're not going to leave. We'll wait till he comes down and we'll talk to him some more. I liked Mike Tyson. And I thought, as I say, he was far more intelligent than people think he is because of his New York tough guy, Brooklyn accent and actions and stuff that he's actually done, biting the air and, off of Holyfield and all that. But I liked him. What are you going to do? Thought he was a good guy. I mean, let me take that back. He appeared to me as a good guy. I know he's done things. I know he went to prison. But when he leaned in and said, you're going to have to leave now, that was pretty scary.
It's interesting that you say that you were scared at that point, which is obviously the natural reaction in such a situation. But it's looking at a lot of the people replying to that video.
Let me just say, I wasn't scared in the sense that I thought he was going to, knock me out. It was
Right.
just frightening that he could be so calm and get right in my face and say, you're going to have to leave now. Like that, somebody else would have said, get the hell out of my house. I've had enough of this, but I liked him.
Well, it's funny, the reaction that I've seen online over the years is people look at that and they say, man, that Goldberg guy, he has nerves of steel. He didn't flinch. He
I know.
was on the
I've heard
inside,
that.
I'm sure you were.
I've heard that. I gave away the real truth. I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. But I wasn't afraid of Mike Tyson doing something like thinking I was a punching bag or anything. That didn't
Right.
cross my mind. It was just that he was speaking emotionally about the death of his daughter. And he knew he wasn't going to talk about it anymore. He couldn't. He couldn't because it was taking too much out of him. It was eating him up. And he had the presence of mind, instead of just getting up and walking out, of telling me what appeared to be very politely, actually, "You're going to have to leave now." To which I
If he
told
had
my
said that,
producer, "We're not leaving any place now."
if he had said it to me, I would have covered my ears right away, just because based on his
Well,
past.
to my credit, if I can put it that way, I didn't say, "Yes, sir, Mike. Yes, sir, Mr. Tyson. We'll be leaving any second now." You know,
No, that's interesting. I'm going to try to when I edit this, put that video in as well, just so people can kind of get a good sampling of what we're talking about if they haven't already seen it. So yeah, no, that's very interesting. That's certainly a very memorable exchange there. So going back a little earlier, I believe this was in 1990. You interviewed one of the biggest names in rock and roll, Paul McCartney of the Beatles. This was for CBS, I think, for a special. McCartney was on tour at the time, and the tour was a pretty big deal. Can you talk about that experience?
yeah. What was the name? Paul who?
Paul McCartney?
I don't know that name. What group was he with?
I think it was the Rolling
Okay,
Stones.
okay. I thought you'd pick up on that a little quicker. I spent 4 days with Paul McCartney, and we really hit it off. And I think it was because he grew up blue collar, I grew up blue collar. I didn't go in as a fan of Paul McCartney. I went in as a journalist, and I think he respected that. I didn't kiss up to Paul McCartney. "Oh, Paul McCartney, you're one of the Beatles." I didn't do anything like that, and I think he respected that. But the story I'd like to tell today is, after 4 days. Let me tell one earlier. He called me one day when he saw me, and during the 4 days, and he said, "I was going to call you last night. Uh, we were jamming he had a big suite at the Ritz-Carlton in Chicago." He said, "We were jamming, and I thought, you might want to come over and listen in on it, but then I thought maybe you wouldn't be interested." I said, "Paul, what are you, crazy? I would have told that story for the rest of my life if had been it." But anyway, he didn't call. But the story I want to tell today is, on the last day, I said goodbye to him. He was standing, you got to picture this. He was standing in the doorway of his suite at the Ritz-Carlton, as I say, in Chicago. And I said goodbye and thanked him for his time, and he thanked me and all that. And then I turned around and walked away, and I got about 10 feet away down the hallway, a long hallway, if you could picture that. My back is towards him. He's still standing in the doorway. And he said, "Take it easy, Dave." And I slowly turned, because I'm not taking that, even from Paul McCartney. I slowly turned and I said, "Dave, you don't know my name, do you?" He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "What's my name?" He said, "Bernie." He said, "Why'd you just call me Dave?" He said, "I call all Americans Dave."
Alrighty. Did he
So
explain why that was?
what's that?
Did he explain why that was?
No, he did. He's Paul McCartney. He wants to call
Does
Americans
it have
Dave.
to?
I think I might have said, "Okay, no problem, Ringo," and turned around and kept walking.
Very good. Well, that's a good one. So let's go back to the world of sports. You interviewed Shaquille O'Neal for HBO. He had been long retired from basketball by then. I think this was just in 2018. And you talked to him about some of his business ventures. What sticks out to you about that interview? I know as a person you're pretty impressed by Shaquille O'Neal.
Yeah, he's a very he figured out one of the great secrets of life. Likability matters. Likability counts for a lot. And he went into business and he sold his likability. He smiles a lot and stuff like that. Anyway, two aspects I want to share with our audience today. One, the opening shot in the piece was Shaquille O'Neal and I walking side by side. He's like 7 foot, 100. And not just that, he's big. I mean, he weighs over 300 pounds. He's big. He's like a mountain. We're walking side by side. He was on the left side, I was on the right side. And I opened the piece with the line, which I thought was one of my better lines that I've written. I said, Shaquille O'Neal, he's the one on the left. Like, like anybody would think I was Shaquille O'Neal, you know?
Right,
And
right.
and the most memorable part of that story for me, from a selfish point of view, is that at the very end of the long story that we did about all his businesses and how he thinks and how he grew up, you know, learning to be a decent guy, and he is a very decent guy. He said to me, "Do you know what I strive to be?" Now that's a serious question. I said, "No, tell me what? Tell me what?" He said, "I want to be the Black Bernie Goldberg." And I fell off the chair laughing, and we ended the story with that line. I want to be the Black Bernie Goldberg. That was his ambition in life.
Oh, that's great. Didn't you, wasn't there some point during that interview where you were talking about how big he is, of how much more large he is now, and I think didn't he tell you to like punch him in the stomach or tap him in the stomach to test his
Yeah,
abs or something?
I'm not punching. You know, we also interviewed another of my favorites, Charles Barkley, in that story. And those two guys, along with, if you ever watch the NBA show on TNT, along with Kenny Smith, those are three good guys. They're really good guys. And Barkley, who I've spoken with also for that piece and for other stories, his claim to fame, you know, you wonder, why is Charles Barkley so memorable? Why does he stand out? Why does he break through the clutter? And I figured this out, because he's honest. Think about that for a second. A guy breaks through the media clutter because he's honest. He tells the truth. What does that tell you about people who appear on TV all the time, giving you their spin about this? You know, Barkley, if he's watching a game and the game stinks, he says, this team stinks. And a lot of people won't say that. You know, they
Right.
won't say that. Barkley is a good guy. Kenny Smith is a great guy. And Shaq, I love these guys.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's just, they seem like are all honest guys, nice guys, people who you can have a great conversation with for sure. So let's talk about someone you interviewed from the political world, Bill Buckley, aka William F. Buckley Jr. He was of course a prominent conservative political commentator. He founded National Review magazine. He was also the host of Firing Line on PBS. To be honest, I don't know much about your interview with him. I was trying to look up some of it. I assume it was for CBS, and I'm guessing that it was probably in the 90s sometimes.
Yeah,
Sometime, but
this was a great story. Great story. The
go ahead.
premise was, I'm telling it to you just as it happened. Bill Buckley, the iconic conservative, was friends with Ira Glasser, the president at the time of the ACLU, right? One uber liberal, one uber conservative. Ira Glasser was going to take Bill Buckley to Shea Stadium to see a Mets game, Bill Buckley's first baseball game he ever attended. And I don't know how old he was at the time, but he wasn't a kid. He was probably in his 60s or maybe 70s, thereabouts. And he had never been to a baseball game. So he shows up to the ACLU office in Midtown Manhattan in a limousine. And Ira Glasser takes him from the ACLU headquarters in Manhattan to Queens, New York, where the Shea Stadium was or is, on the subway. Bill Buckley, who doesn't go from his bedroom to his kitchen unless he's in a limousine, is going to the baseball game on a subway. And while we're in the subway, the train station, I say, I don't get it. You've never been to a baseball game in your life? And he said, well, everybody has a lacuna. And I'm thinking, what the hell is a lacuna? I figure, oh, yeah, everybody has a lacuna, Bill. I guess so. I guess I have a lacuna. And then we froze the picture of him saying that on screen. And we put up, how in a dictionary you see how the word is broken up into section. We said lacuna, a gap in one's knowledge. And then I said, I knew that.
Oh,
Truth be
that's
told, I never heard the word lacuna before he threw it at me on a subway platform going to Queens. So let me just review. Bill Buckley shows up in a limousine, goes to a baseball game on a subway, has never been to a baseball game in his life, and he explains it all away by saying, well, everybody has a lacuna. And I'm thinking, what language are we speaking here?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, one thing I've heard about Buckley for people that knew him was that whenever, and this is for people that didn't know him very well either, but when you would have a conversation with him, he had sort of a way of just being genuinely interested in you and being about as personable as one can be. Was that sort of your experience with him?
He brought in lunch. He brought in lunch for us, for the crew and me. And he did write me a letter after the piece. And he said he was disappointed because we only showed 9 seconds of him playing the harpsichord at a concert. And I wrote back and I said, Bill, the reason it was 14 seconds, not 9, Bill. But the reason we showed that little is because I thought if you became a professional doing that, we would miss the fact that you write such brilliant columns.
He really was. I mean, just a very thoughtful individual, not just, personally, but, in his writing too. And I think that's something he's definitely missed on that front. I think he still has a lot to be proud of. I think National Review, I think, is still, done a good job in the tradition of what he envisioned for it. I'm sure it's changed a little bit beyond what he would have imagined, but it's, yeah, no, he definitely has an important legacy, I think, when it comes to our political discourse.
I told him that my father, who worked in a factory as a blue collar guy and didn't have a college education for sure, was a big fan of the show, of Bill Buckley's Firing Line. And Buckley responded with, he said, when I go to the airport, a lot of the sky caps, the guys who in the old days, would take your bags from the car to check them in. He said, they all recognize me and watch the show too. So here's a true intellectual. And yet he had a touch with what we at least used to call the common man, common person. The people we're mentioning, McCartney, Tyson, Shaq, Buckley, I treated them as subjects in an interview. I didn't fawn over them or anything resembling that. But John, I'm telling you, and I'm telling all the people watching us, I like those 4 people. I liked them a lot.
So that'll bring us. This was one interview we weren't sure we were going to talk about it. I do think we should bring it in though.
All right.
It's because
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jerry Lee Lewis. It's a little different than what you just talked about.
Jerry Lee Lewis is one of the great rock and rollers of all time. I mean, one of the greats. So before I went to Mississippi to interview him in his own house, in his living room, CBS News had spent $60,000 for camera crews and all that and travel, following him around, doing some of his shows and all that. And then I come in to sit down with him to do the interview. He showed up several hours late for the interview in his own living room, and he was in another room in his house. Let that sink in. He was in the house, I was in the house, and he showed up late, very late, for the interview. Okay. The interview was going to be largely about the fact that the IRS had taken everything away from him, almost everything away from him. And I said, Jerry, you had a classic car collection, and the IRS swooped in, took all your cars away. How'd you feel about that? He said, oh, that was okay. It was no big deal. I said, they took a lot of your money away. What'd you think about that? I mean, they just came in and they garnished your money. He said, yeah, it wasn't anything. It's okay. This went on for a while. And then I said, Jerry, adios. I'll see you. And I got up and left. And the producer in the car heading for the airport was not happy. And he said, we spent $60,000. I said, well, what do you want me to do? I mean, sometimes you do an interview, and it doesn't happen often. He wasn't, I think he's no longer with us. So I'm going to theorize. I think he was on a substance to bring him down, not dope or anything like that. I think he was on a substance to calm him down because he had been at one time in his life on substances he shouldn't have been on. And I think it made him so calm that when I said, they went into your garage. I mean, he had a nice big house on a sprawling estate in Mississippi, rural Mississippi. They took all your cars. I mean, you collected these cars. You'd think he'd say, yeah, that really broke my heart. I mean, I love those cars. No, he said, yeah, it's okay. And I realized I'm going to get nowhere. We could do this for an hour, and I'm getting nowhere. So I just said, we're going to wrap it up. He was fine with that too, by the way.
You should have taken some of his stuff on the way out just to see if he would have reacted. Some memorabilia or something. But
yeah, Jerry, you mind if I have the Great Balls of Fire original 45?
Exactly. Man, you should have taken advantage of that. But no, they can't all go smooth, right?
No, they can't. But the job of the producer in TV is to make sure they all do go smooth, because I went on a story once with a guy who was a deep sea diver, and he and his wife went really down deep in Mexico, I think it was, and he forgot, ready for this? He forgot to fill her air tank and she died. That's a great story, right?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So I sit down with him and I say, I won't say his name, call him Mr. X. Tell me about that day when you went deep diving in Mexico. And he says, well, we went to the water and we went to the diving water. And I'm sitting a foot away from him. I can't understand a word he's saying. He's speaking English. So I said, could you hang on just a second, time out? And I went outside with the producer and I said, he doesn't speak English. Did you know that? Did you know that? And he said, his secretary told me he spoke perfect English. I said, so you never spoke to him before this interview, is that right? He said, no, I didn't. I said, well, what do you think we're going to do? Put a translation under it, subtitles under it when he's speaking English, and we're going to put it in English? Sometimes it doesn't work out right. But the producer's job is to make sure it does. And when it doesn't, I could be a difficult person to work with. Let's just leave it at that. I don't want any fingerprints on my past. I was not always easy if the producer didn't do his job correctly, but almost all of them did.
Especially your wife, right? Because she would not.
I said this once before. I'm going to say it again. My wife was a great producer, but one of the reasons I was hesitant to work with her, even though CBS wanted us to work together because they could save money on a hotel room. Usually you'd have to have 2 rooms. They only needed 1 room. We're married. Is because I could say to any other producer, especially if it was a male producer, call me a sexist if you want, but I would not say this to a female producer. You stupid son of a bitch. What the hell were you thinking when you set me up for an interview with a guy who doesn't speak English and I can't understand what he's saying, you moron? What the hell? Try saying that if your wife sets up that interview. It's not happening. But it never happened that way with my wife because she was an excellent producer and an excellent wife also.
Oh. Very good. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up the episode there. I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. I think these stories are very interesting. After the last format we did that was similar to this, a lot of people said they'd like to see this as sort of a regular thing every few months or so. So we'll talk about that and also read your feedback about this episode. Speaking of feedback from our previous episode, Ross from the Washington Examiner had a special guest on. It sort of changed things up a little bit. I will say that I won't say who this person is yet, but we have another special guest lined up. This person is a DC journalist who I'm guessing just about everyone watching this is familiar with. So we're definitely looking forward to that. And if anybody has any suggestions for other topics of the No BS Zone, leave them in the comments section below. Let your friends know about what we're doing here so we can have more of an audience too to share in this. Bernie, is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
If we do anything like this again, maybe I'll tell you about the psychiatrist whose patients were dogs. He was a dog psychiatrist true story, that I did.
That's great. Sounds like a great story. Great. Well, thanks a lot, Bernie. Appreciate you doing this, and you have a great day. All right.
You too, John.
Thank you.